Welcome to Unlocking Human Potential with me, your host, Andy Hosgood, a podcast dedicated to exploring what really takes psychologically, behaviourally and practically to help humans thrive through conversations with leaders, founders, coaches, behavioural experts and people shaping how humans perform and grow. Is this for you? But if you're a leader, a founder, a business owner, an ambitious professional who wants to do more than just perform, they want to grow, inspire, bringing the best out of yourself and the people around you, then the mission is simple: to explore how individuals and teams unlock potential in themselves, in others, and the organisations they shape. Each episode is a deep but relaxed conversation built around three core questions. How do we optimise ourselves? How do we unlock potential in others? And what's the best advice that our guests can give to you, the listener? So now over to this episode. I really hope you find it helpful and insightful. Simon.
Andy, how are you?
I'm awesome, thank you.
Good.
So welcome to Unlocking Human Potential with me, Andy Hosgood. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Always, you're always going to be on the you're on the top list of me.
Flashy will get you everywhere.
Pardon?
Flashy will get you everywhere.
I'm trying. Trying. So today's guest, Simon Beesley. Someone who believes that leadership should feel more human, especially when the pressure is on. Simon is the founder of Growth Consulting, a culture and leadership consultancy helping organizations create workplaces where people can do their best work without burning out, disengaging, or quietly counting down to Friday. Simon works across the NHS, healthcare, and SMEs, supporting leaders who are navigating complexity, high demand, and constant change. He designs and delivers leadership development, management training, culture change, team development, the kind that actually changes how people show up to work, not just what's written on the wall. He is a certified resilience coach, helping individuals and teams build the capacity to perform well in demanding roles, not by toughening up, but by learning how to recover, adapt, and stay human under pressure. What I like about Simon is that he's thoughtful, grounded, and refreshingly real. No leadership theatre, no quick fixes, just a deep belief that better cultures start with better self-awareness and better conversations. Today, we explore how Simon optimizes himself, how he unlocks potential in others, and the practical advice leaders can use right now. So if you care about leading like a human, then this one's for you. So let's dive in.
Thank you, Andy.
When I was reading this back, it's one of the things we connected on was, I think, we connected via LinkedIn and we connected on our, I would say, share values around humans. And I think, that came again when we had a conversation, didn't we? And I think, so, I really, really value the work that you're doing. So I thought it would be great for our listeners to kind of really get to know what you're doing, the insights that you'd share. It's like I always start with our guests. What's something that you're curious about right now?
Something I'm curious about. I guess today I'm curious about how I can, what I can share with people over the course of this podcast that will help them come away with some practical insights that will help them unlock the potential in themselves.
Flipping, have you read the script to this? That's brilliant. And that is it, and that's one of the reasons why, I'm looking forward to this conversation, because, one of the ways that we run this podcast is, we're going to dive into how do we unlock the best out of ourselves. I mean, we might lean into that as you personally, what you do, or for leaders out there, how they can get the best out of themselves. And then we need to lean into, well, that's great. If we're optimal, how do we help support, unlock the potential in others and make optimal teams? So how do we make the people around us optimal too? And then for me, for listeners that are going to spend the next hour listening to us sharing insights, or hopefully you sharing all the insights and me about listening, learning, and making notes too. I think it's really important that what we do is wrap up, like you've said, and give that practical advice that what can they do with this information. I think it's great that we can have a great conversation and great that we can share some stories, but actually then helping listeners to actually really put things together and go, right, okay, so there's great information. What can we now do with that? So if we're going to wrap up with that.
Yeah. And I think for me, Andy, so I spend a lot of my time developing and delivering management and leadership training, particularly for kind of junior and middle managers. And I'm sure we'll come back to the reason why a little bit later on. Working for myself, one of the things I don't get to see is how people take what I've worked with them on and put that into practice, or rarely do I see that. Very different to when I worked in paid employment. But I think one of the things that is really important to me, and the way I wrap up all of my sessions now, is kind of that so what question. So we've had a lovely time today. We've learnt lots. We've had a good laugh. What are we going to do that's different now? Because if people don't take at least one thing away that helps them in their life, in their work, in their relationships, whatever it is, it's kind of been a bit of a waste of a day.
100%, and it's almost the reason I love that so what question. That's the last question of most of my presentation slides as well. So and I think it is, isn't it? It's and that's where we'll definitely be spending time for listeners who are new to this or familiar with this. That's where we will be spending our last kind of 10 minutes of our conversation, really sitting and playing out. So thinking about self, where does it land when I turn around and say, like, how do you make yourself optimal?
How do you make yourself optimal? So, me personally, and I think that's really important because it's a very individual thing. I can share lots of different tools and tips, but they won't necessarily work for people. It has to be something that you find out for yourself in terms of what's going to work for you. And the way that I've done that really has been trying lots of different tools and techniques that I've picked up. Some of those have stuck and I use them religiously to this day. Some of them I forget about because they haven't really worked. Some of them drift in and out of my consciousness and I think, oh yeah, I might try and add that in. And for me, I think I did a presentation recently where I was talking about my career, and I broke my career down into 3 key blocks. 25 years working in the private sector, 15 years working in and around the NHS, and then the last 2.5 years working for myself. But one of the things I added into that into that timeline was a block around about my sort of late 40s, early 50s, where when I reflect on it, there wasn't one kind of big life-changing moment, but there was a number of events dotted over a 3 or 4 year period that really changed my understanding of myself, and also in terms of what it was that I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And it was that really got me thinking about, okay, how do I optimize myself here? So that really took me into reading a lot more than I used to, listening to a lot of podcasts, taking lots of information and trying lots of different tools. And there's 3 kind of key elements, I think, that have really helped to keep me thinking how I want to think and what brings out the best in me, how I'm optimized. The first one is a podcast. So one of those moments that happened, it was on a random car journey. I remember it very clearly. It was a routine car journey for work. The A14 road that I usually took for that journey was closed. I ended up doing a bit of a detour through country lanes. And for some reason, I decided I didn't want to listen to music. I wanted to listen to a podcast. Not really listened to podcasts before. And I stumbled on something called the High Performance Podcast with Jake Humphrey and Professor Damien Hughes. And the only reason I listened to it was because it was with Jenson Button and I'm a Formula One fan.
Okay.
That podcast has been so helpful for me because that really helped to open my eyes up, because it wasn't just about sport, it was about mindset, it was about how you optimize your potential. So that was one of the things. And I've listened to pretty much every edition or every episode of High Performance since then. And it's very rare that any of those episodes go by without some note being put down in my notebook of things that people have shared that I think, yeah, that resonates with me. That might be something to try. That fits in with what I'm doing. So that's number one. Second one was reading the book called The Chimp Paradox by Professor Steve Peters.
Yeah.
That helped me really get a better understanding of what's going on up there and how, not just how my brain works, but also how other people's brains work as well. And I've done a lot of work, not just through reading Chimp Paradox, but I've been to several seminars that Steve Peters has delivered, and I've also done the Mind Management for Life program that they deliver, a virtual program. And there's a lot of practices in there that I bring into my day-to-day approach. Before we started recording, we talked about the fact that it's taken a few minutes out just to set yourself this episode. That's something I try and do 3 or 4 times during the course of the day. Okay, am I being the version of myself that I set out to at the start of the day? Am I focusing on the right thing? So that bit about being conscious about what's going on around me, where I'm at, and if I'm the human side of myself or is the chimp side of my brain running things, and then trying to bring that back to the human side. So that's kind of the second one. And then the third one, Japanese concept of ikigai.
Nice.
Ikigai was something I discovered through High Performance Podcast, and it's ikigai. I think it hasn't got a literal translation, but it pretty much means reason for being. And it's something I'd encourage everybody to take a look at in more detail. It's not something you can sit down in 5 minutes and do. It's something that you're thinking about and working towards over a period of time. But in effect, it asks you to think about 4 questions. What is it that you're good at? What is it that you love doing? What is it that the world needs? And that world can be the world, or it can be your world, however you choose to interpret that. And the fourth one is what you can get paid for. And round about 3 or 4 years ago, when I discovered Ikigai, I spent some time working through what that looked like, and that really helped me get an understanding of what I want to spend my life doing, because I know if I'm doing something that I'm good at, that I love doing, and that the world needs, then I'm going to get a sense of fulfillment. The fact that it also pays the bills is a bit of a bonus. And that was a tip I actually got when I was working through that, was don't worry too much about what you get paid for, because if you've got the other 3 right, you'll undoubtedly be able to get paid for it. So those 3 things come together for me in terms of that gives me a direction, a sense of purpose, why I do what I do. I'm getting lots of knowledge and information in from different people across the world, and that's one of the things I love about living in this time, is the fact that knowledge is so accessible nowadays. And then that whole piece about how I navigate the way that my brain works and how I keep myself as optimal as I can be. And it's not easy. It can sound very easy, but it's not. It's quite challenging. Something you constantly have to work at. It's like going to the gym, but exercising the brain as opposed to other muscles. So those 3 things are the things that I think really help to keep me optimal.
No, I really like that. And if I can just reflect a few things back, just to see. So there's obviously, you shared some things there, that there was obviously a moment that, there was a moment when you listened to the podcast, and, before we came on air, we kind of talked around, there's moments in our lives where we're more open to different things. And we said, look, 5 years ago, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. It just happens to be where you are in yours and where I'm in mine, that we've aligned in a way that's made this happen. I'm just curious if you could. So, it seems that you're quite open to change at that moment. And obviously you had a high level of self-awareness to realize that actually what was going on for you, and the fact that when you listen to that High Performance Podcast, something resonated. For listeners that's maybe, live in a world that they don't feel suboptimal, or they are feeling suboptimal at the moment, and that might be stress, or feel an overwhelming anxiety, or, unhappiness in where the world is. how would you, and there's quite a big question, so, how would you kind of support people to say, how do we stop where we are to reflect on, to become more open or more self-aware? You know, is there anything around that you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think some of it comes back to identity.
Okay.
The person that you are, and the person that you want to be. And I'll take this from the chimp management. What Steve Peters will say, and I've done this exercise, is that if you sit down with a blank piece of paper and describe the type of person that you ideally want to be, what he will tell you is that that is who you are. But what you see on that piece of paper will often be different to the version of you that you're experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And that's the difference between those two, is where the chimp side of your brain is the bit that's interfering with the real you. And there's a piece there about understanding about who it is that you really want to be, and then working from there in terms of how you get to that point. I was watching SAS Celebrity Who Dares Wins recently, and Danny Dyer, as in the daughter, not the dad. She described herself. This really resonated with me. She described herself as an anxious person, and the conversation myself and my wife had watching this on the sofa was, she's not helping herself by describing herself as an anxious person, because she's making it about her. If she tried to separate that by saying, I'm a person that has anxiety, it becomes a lot easier mentally to manage that. So for me, there's a big bit about being clear about what your identity is and what you want your future self to be like. And then it's a case of, okay, based on what the difference is between where you are now and where you want to be, is how you go about navigating your way in that direction.
Not really like that. So let me just play that back. So there's two things I took from that. There's one, be careful what you say about yourself. So you're not an anxious person. It's, I have an anxious feeling, or, anxious thoughts, whatever it is. So instead of creating it as an identity, it's, I am a good person that happens to also have anxious anxiety. And also the fact of, if you are listening to this and you're going, oh, it's all right for you, you seem to have got all your stuff, your ducks in a row. Firstly, I don't know many people have got all the ducks in a row, so don't worry about that. And then secondly is, maybe write down who is the person you want to be, and just maybe just analyze, okay, so how far I'm away from them, and what steps do I need to take?
Yeah, very much so. I use visualization quite a bit as well. Something that I came across last year, again through a podcast, listened to a lady called Maya Raichura, written a brilliant book called Visualize, which gives you an understanding of what visualization is. Now, to me, it used to be like, it was manifestation, where, I think I'm going to be driving this car, and I'm going to, all of those things, and all of a sudden they magically happen. That isn't what it is. But she will say that you can't outperform your identity. So by visualizing who it is that you're going to be, how you're going to act, how you're going to think, how you're going to interact with people, how you're going to feel, that helps to create those neural pathways that will help you realize that identity.
No, I really like that.
Yeah,
I really like that. And what I will for listeners, all of the books that Sam's recommended, we'll stick in the show notes as well, so that they can go.
Now, the identity bit for me, if we go back to sort of early 50s, I didn't have any of those tools. I was very much the kind of person who thought, okay, I am who I am. I can't change who I am, how I behave. People have to take me as I am.
Okay.
Which is why we wouldn't have been having this conversation at that particular point in time.
And how has that change been for you?
Oh, it's been not just for me, but for people around me. I think it's been it's really it has been quite literally life changing. I've got a better understanding of myself and how I how other people see me and how other people experience me, both from a positive and from a negative perspective. And it's kind of given me a lease of life, and it's why I do what I do now. My wife and I had a conversation 4 years ago that both of us remember incredibly vividly. It was New Year's Day. We went out for a walk in local woods, and we were talking about what we're going to do when the mortgage is paid. And at that stage, 5 years left on the mortgage. We both worked in the same organisation. The first thing both of us said was it wouldn't carry on doing what we were doing at that particular point in time. My wife had a very clear vision in terms of what it was that she wanted to do. So she, like me, worked in the NHS. She'd worked in the NHS for 30 years. Her passion has always been about how she can help other people with home organising and decluttering. She knew what it was that she wanted to do. For me, it was a little bit more woolly. I was still locked into the fact that, okay, we'll worry about this in 5 years' time when the mortgage is paid. But the answer I gave to was that I want to be able to use the knowledge and experiences that I've had and the tools that I've developed and share them with people in any way that people might benefit from. So they've got an opportunity to see that actually there might be different ways of doing things that they struggle with. And really it's through that conversation has really helped to shape where we are now.
No, I like that. And again, you almost talked earlier on about purpose as well. And I feel like that when you were talking about that, I'll share it with me. There was a sense that I could feel when you said that, when you were talking about actually when it aligned in your head of what it is you want to do and share. I could almost see a change in body language. Your smile come up and stuff.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I always use that sensation. People go, I don't know what my purpose, but what energizes you, what obviously makes you, when you talk about it, get a little bit more giddy or tempoed up.
Yeah. And I think it changes, but we all go through different cycles in our lives. And if I look at, so when I decided, I'm going to go and work for myself now, 2.5 years ago, sat down with a blank piece of paper and thought, what's this going to look like? When I look at it now, it's very different in terms of what I do on a day-to-day basis. That isn't what I envisaged. The thing that does happen, though, is that the impact that I have and that I get feedback on is probably greater than what I envisaged at the time. And that's the thing that really keeps me buzzing. And the days when you're sitting there trying to work out how to pull a session together for somebody and you're thinking, I'm never going to get this right. It's that thought of the feedback, the advice you get at the end of it from people, and just a little text message you get from people in terms of how they put something into practice. They're the things that you think, that's what I do this for.
And I get the impression that the reason why there's an element of you sitting down planning with such depth is because it is important to you that it lands well and it does make change. Is that fair?
Yeah. Part of it is the way my brain's wired.
Okay. Okay.
One of those those experiences around the sort of late 40s, early 50s was the fact that I was diagnosed as having Asperger's.
Okay.
Never aware of it before. I had to do a lot of reading about it. But it explained an awful lot, not just in terms of behaviour, but in terms of the work that I enjoyed doing. So I've done lots of different roles throughout my career. The thing I've always come back to, the stuff that I enjoy, is less operational side and more project and program management. And I recognised how that whole bit about planning and quite a linear process, that suited the way that my brain prefers to work. I actually try and really challenge my brain now because I don't want to continue to work in a really rigid way. I used to hold on to things for too long and miss the opportunity. I'm much more comfortable now with, rather than waiting until something's perfect, letting it go, seeing how it works, and then evolve it. But that whole bit about planning, it is important to me that what I do ticks the box for the client.
Well, the two things, and then we'll move on to team if you like. One of the things is, one, if this helps. So you shared a post on Ikigai on your LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I then shared it. and someone reached out to me, said,
Okay.
I've done that exercise.
Yeah.
And he went, flipping heck, that's powerful. And so even the work that you're doing, there's people in my network that
Yeah.
saw that post, took part in it, and went, that's quite good, isn't it?
That's great.
And then it's gone on. So I thought I'd share that with you because I
Thank
know
you.
that's important. But yeah, he
Yeah.
actually reached out to me and went, you know that fella? I said, well, funnily enough, it's going to be on the podcast soon, so you'll get to know a lot more. Yeah, so and I think that's the nice thing, isn't it? One of the things I will, if you don't mind, and you can choose to move on, but I was just curious. You said that you've now found out that this is that, so this planning and process is you're familiar or you're comfortable, but then you're trying to change and challenge your brain.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, how's that going? Is it how you finding that process of change?
It's hard, really hard. So if anyone tells you any kind of change is easy, I think you're either it's not a big enough change and not something that's challenging enough for you. When you're trying to change the way that I, there's almost that bit about being able to almost excuse it, and which I think is what I used to. Used to excuse my behaviour because that's the way I am. That's lazy to me because you can change anything. It's not easy. You have to be persistent at it, and it's not a linear process. So for every step forward I take half a step back, and sometimes you think this is too difficult, but you've got to keep trying those things. And I've got a little note written down that just remind me every so often to, okay, are you being the person that you want to be? It comes back to that identity thing. So my identity isn't wrapped up therefore in the planning bit. It's about what the output looks like. Those bits give me comfort because I like to be able to go and stand up in front of a group of people knowing what it is that I'm going to say. But actually, as soon as I finish my first sentence, I don't know what's going to happen. So that whole piece about then the plan has almost gone out the window. I think it was Mike Tyson who said, the plan goes out the window as soon as you get punched in the face. I've not been punched in the face on a training session yet, but metaphorically, plenty of times.
Yeah. No, and I think it's really important. And the reason why I kind of wanted to kind of hang around that comment was just on the fact that I think for a lot of people, and if you're listening to this and say, well, I can't change because this is who I am, I think it was a really important point that you're actually having to make a conscious decision to do that. And that probably going into unfamiliarity and at time quite uncomfortable moments to make that change. And I'm assuming that is just to improve upon yourself and make yourself better and the outcome better for others.
Absolutely, yeah. Particularly how other people experience me as well. That's more important because it comes back to that. What helps you feel happy? What helps you feel fulfilled? If I've had a positive impact on people, then I'll take that.
No, definitely. And just if it helps, you made me smile when you said, after the first minute, I don't know what's going to come out my mouth. I've now, when I present, I used to write a script and then I'd just go. And then I realized that every time I presented it, it would be nothing like I planned. So I only planned the first slide because after that, I generally do not know what is going to come out of my mouth until I've said it. So yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
I think for me, so the version of me that stands up in front of a group of people, particularly delivering a training session, is very different to the version of me that people who live with me or have grown up with me experience. They kind of, I always have to almost flick a switch. And again, some of that is about identity. But one of the things I've got a lot better at, the more I've done it, is the adaptability. So I'm much more comfortable now standing up in front of a group of people where they can ask me any question, and I'm quite happy to move the session around to accommodate that, as opposed to say, no, you can't ask that at this point because this is my next slide and this is what we're going to cover next.
Yeah, and I like that. But it does take a lot of, it does take quite a lot of self-belief in that as well, doesn't it? To be able to do that and to be able to be comfortable. I always call it the behavioral flexibility piece, isn't it? Being able to kind of very quickly adapt to the environment you're in.
Absolutely, yeah. A belief is such an important thing. because I think if you go into any situation where you don't have 100% belief in what it is that you're trying to achieve, you're not going to tap into your full potential, and therefore the results that you're going to get as a result of that are going to be suboptimal, which is always going to reinforce the negative belief in the first place.
Yeah. No, I really like that. And then going on to the team element, I guess if you're delivering something to others, if your self-belief, I always kind of, the way I would always envision myself is that if I don't believe myself, that is going to come across in the way I portray myself to others.
Yeah.
So I always feel if I'm being unauthentic in what I believe or in my identity that you're talking about, I always have this, maybe it's a fear about how I then project myself. People are going to go, so actually I can only come from the place that I feel that is right and true to me. And that's, I've got a little mantra before I walk on stage to say, well, I'm just here to share some helpful stuff that I think's helpful. And I almost articulate at the start. If it's helpful to you, that's great. I have got a presentation or a plan for the session that we're going to deliver. If we go off on a tangent, we go off on a tangent, but we've got it there to go.
Yeah. I used to stand in front of groups of people thinking that everything I said had to land with every person in the room. And if it didn't, then I'd failed. And I kind of thought back to myself in terms of what happens when I'm on the receiving end in a training session or a keynote or whatever. And I recognised quite quickly that I never take all of it away. There'll be one or two bits that resonate. So I'm now much more focused on, okay, if people can take one thing away from this session that's helpful, then that's great. And I don't look around the room now looking for everybody to be sitting there nodding and agreeing and clapping and thinking this is great, because I know that isn't the case. If I can find one person who's engaging in one particular part of it, I'm speaking to them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think, but it's really important, isn't it? And I think so moving on to teams and unlocking others. So, you've been really open about yourself, and I think there's some amazing insights, and I appreciate you, really sharing some of them. So how then, there's people out there maybe in leadership. I know you work with a lot of junior middle managers, so they're, and I'm assuming they're kind of on their ladder, the leadership ladder. So they'll be listening to this part of it going, okay, cool, I can take that because it's how I unlock more potential at myself to become better. But obviously they might now have some managerial leadership or team members that they have to. So how do we then take this and then help others support unlock potential in others?
Okay. I think if we stick around middle and junior managers, I've worked with senior leaders, and I enjoy working with senior leaders. Again, when I come back to what I'm passionate about, it is those middle and junior managers for several reasons. First of all, I think that and I'm happy for people to shoot me down here, in the vast majority of organisations, middle managers are under more pressure than anybody else, because they're getting pressure both from senior people and also from their teams. And often those people in those roles, and I think that there's a figure, there's a term, accidental managers, which the Chartered Management Institute came up with. 82% of managers in the UK are accidental managers. So that's people who are in management roles who have not been given the training, the tools that they need to be able to do a management job in the most effective way. No disrespect to the individuals, because they are all willing people who want to do well. But often their route to success takes them through a managerial position, particularly in healthcare, that they never particularly wanted in the first place. And I think when we don't give people the tools and the capability to be able to navigate those roles, you're not only letting them down in the organisation, you're also letting their team down as well. So that, plus the fact that ultimately the people that are today's junior and middle managers are going to be next the senior manager of the future, I think it's so important that we almost try and factory fit good practice with them, as opposed to retrofit it when it's kind of too late. One of the things that I say in all of my sessions to managers is that remember you are a role model. What you do on a day-to-day basis is far more important than what you say. We have this persistent gap in a lot of organizations between the values that the organization and the leaders talk about and the behaviors that people experience. And it's really important to try and close that gap. So come back to your identity. What are your values? What's coming out of your mouth? And does what's coming out of your mouth align to the actions that you're taking on a day-to-day basis with your team? Because if you don't do that, you can't get trust from your team. And if you can build trust and get your team to trust you, they will go to the ends of the earth with you. But you can lose that trust very quickly as soon as they start to identify the mismatch between what you say and what it is that you do.
No, definitely. And can we just stay on kind of that, if we stay on that kind of, so it's interesting, isn't it? What was the accidental leaders? What was the percentage?
82%.
Right. And it's funny because I would have, a lot of the stuff I've read around the kind of the leadership ladder and how all those kind of things that occur, how normally the best performer in an organization goes, oh, do you know what? You're doing really well. We're going to promote you to now being team leader or, like you said, some kind of leadership role, either supervisor or leader, and then going into kind of some kind of middle management role. Normally because they're really good at the job they're doing rather than the job that they need to do or be into.
Yeah, very much so.
So I guess the curiosity then is, because it's interesting, isn't it, that when I was listening to that, I was listening to the story of the guy that I remember talking to CEO and I said, why is your behavior like that?
Yeah.
Just a curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And he went, oh, what do you mean? And I said, well, you've explained to me that every level of leadership, you felt treated really, really badly. Now you're actually explaining that you're doing the same behavior that you've at every level said badly. And he looked at me and went, yeah, I didn't see it like that. But because it had been habitual that, well, that's how I was treated. So when I got into that position, I just treated people like I was treated. Now he's the big boss.
Yeah.
Nothing had changed culturally.
No.
And you go, oh, okay.
And that's the thing for junior managers. What they're looking at is to succeed in this organization, that's the way that I need to behave. So for those people that are ambitious, what they're looking at is the people at the top of the organization because they see them as being successful. Yeah. For some people, that's really uncomfortable because actually those behaviors don't necessarily align with my values and the way I want to do things. So yeah, and I think it's how we break that cycle.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So if you could, it'd be nice to kind of just delve into some insight. So in those kind of meetings, if you've got, so I'm assuming, like you've said, if they're the 82, I guess we can kind of make a good statistic that, 4 out of every 5 people that are in your sessions are kind of going, oh, I'm now a manager. So is there sometimes you actually have to shine a light on these statistics and shine a light of what good behaviors of management is?
Yeah, one of the things that I always try and start with is a bit about self-awareness, a bit of self-reflection, and getting people to understand how they see themselves, but also how other people see them as well.
Okay.
So again, one of the curiosities, particularly in the NHS, is that we only do 360-degree appraisals for people over a certain position above.
Yeah.
Middle managers often don't get included in 360-degree appraisals. So I do an exercise called Johari's window, which is trying to get people to colleagues, peers, bosses, subordinates to give feedback for people. So the whole piece about how you're perceived by other people, I think, is really important. Because once you've got that understanding of how other people can see you, you can align that with, okay, how do I want to be seen? And again, come back to this thing about the identity gap. Okay, what is it that I'm doing that's giving them that feeling? And how do I need to change that to give them the feeling that they experience that I want them to have?
Could you just share a little bit on the exercise around Johari's window for those that may be unfamiliar with it?
Yeah, it goes. I think it was about 1950s. It was first developed, and it goes in and out of fashion. But in effect, what you do is you identify a group of people that work with you um, from different levels of an organisation, and you ask them to identify from a set of words. I think it was about 45 words, at least 3 words that would describe you. And they do that anonymously, send that back in. You'll also do a similar sort of exercise, and Johari's window is a 2 by 2 grid, and it tells you what it is that you know about yourself, what it is that you don't know about yourself that others see. There's the unknown unknowns, and then there's what other people. Yeah. So that grid, and then the idea then is that okay, wait, what you ultimately want to do is get to a point where how you see yourself and how you experience yourself aligns with how you want to be seen and how others see you as well.
Yeah, and that's really nice, isn't it? Because there's the, you know, if there's not the if the perception of others is different from the perception of self,
Yeah,
then actually there's a misalignment. And that's
absolutely.
why, sometimes people, an example that might help share listeners to kind of align with this is that, for often leaders will say, well, I'm always telling them to do this and I'm always telling them to do that. I'm always telling them to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And and what's the outcome? Well, they don't do it.
Hmm.
But then you go back and ask the team and go, so just curious, we're being told to do stuff, but we don't know how to do stuff, or they're not really giving us the detail or whatever, but we're too afraid to ask. So again, there's the perception is, you know, what's being delivered is not the idea, the message is mixed matched.
Absolutely, yeah, and we're all unique human beings, and that bit of, just because I say something doesn't necessarily mean that the filter that goes through the other person means it lands in the same way.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of this is about for leadership. I always tell people leadership is really hard. And when I go into a leadership or management development session, I tell them I'm about to make it an awful lot harder for you because there's a lot of stuff that people don't do that you always need to do in order to become the most effective leader and manager that you can be. And it's quite interesting because when I look back into some of the approaches that I took as a manager and leader, I think, God, I got it so badly wrong. I wish I knew then what I know now. Um, but the biggest thing for me is about leadership isn't a position; it's a behaviour, and it's an experience you give people. It's a feeling that you give to people, and I think that comes from how you spend the time connecting with the people that you are leading. Um, because the better you get to know people, what's going on for them, not just professionally, but also outside of work, who their partner is, what the children's names are, what they do at the weekend, all of those kinds of things. When you start to foster those types of connections with people, it becomes far easier for people that when you communicate something to them, for them to be able to say, actually, Simon, I don't really understand what it is that you just said, or I don't know how best to go about doing that. If you don't have that connection, don't have that trust from people, then they're far less likely to come back to you and ask the question.
Yeah, and the words, it's come up in quite a few of our conversations on this podcast. So there's obviously no psychological, you use the word trust.
Mm-hmm.
And I know in a lot of, especially a lot of the things I'm involved in, the word psychological safety, as in how do we create an environment where we
Mm-hmm.
can
Mm-hmm.
kind of just out of curiosity, I don't understand what you mean, because there is for a lot of organizations, and especially to a boss, you don't want to be seen as that person, do you? Whereas actually then, like you've said, if there's things going on in people's worlds, and I think the reason why we align, the reason why I wanted this podcast is because, if we're humans first and we recognize that actually, we're all got stuff going on in our worlds. And actually, if you want to connect with somebody, people only share what they need to share. But even if you know that something's going on in their world, that even be aware of it without the detail, it can help them sometimes understand why they behave in the way they behave.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. With teams, um, I work with a lot of managers who talk about, oh, we've got a clique in this team. There's a group of people who are on the outside and they're quite disruptive and they're this and that. Use lots of negative terms around them. And I think I've probably done the same thing when I was a manager, hands up. What I recognise now is that the reason why people tend to behave like that is because they're not getting from the team or from the leader something that they need. So this isn't about having to like people. This is about having respect and some kind of connection with them. So if you've got cliques forming in your team, rather than blaming the people that are in the cliques, look at yourself and think, okay, what is it that they're looking for, that they need from this team, from this role, that they're not getting? And can we do something to try and give them that without compromising what we're doing for the rest of the team and for our stakeholders, be they patients, be they customers, however you choose to term them?
No, I really like all that, and I guess it's something resonating. Let's say there is, I don't know, and you can see where this goes, and if there's any insights you'd like to share. So there are leaders listening who has just gone when you've just said the words, and there's a click in the team, and they've gone, yeah, I've got one of them, and then you've just turned around and gone, actually, look at yourself.
Yeah.
They're going, oh no, okay, let's turn it back on me, right? And maybe now they've just become self-aware. They're going, oh, actually, okay, so I might play a role in this. What would be the first step in somebody who's gone, okay, so if the click in the team might potentially be my responsibility to solve or to manage or to improve, what would be the first step in a direction to improve upon that?
Having a conversation with the individual, but having a conversation at a human level, and those kind of things. So if you go back into the office this afternoon and think, okay, I need to have a different conversation with that person, it will become over as very inauthentic if you completely change the way that you approach things. So there's kind of almost a gradual approach, but one that you're consistent with. So it's just starting to ask those questions, because invariably, in my experience, the people that are in cliques are the people that managers then don't have the conversations with about how was your weekend, or how's your mum? I know she was going into hospital, or how did your husband get on with the difficulty he was having in his job? Those small conversations, not the formal one-to-ones that you sat across a desk, but the conversations when you're making a drink or you pass each other in a corridor. Start to build those connections, because that's what will then start to get you to understand that person in a far better way.
And is there firstly, I love that, and I think, is there any tips, insights that you could share about how they can do that consistently, especially for people that, if it's unnatural, unfamiliar, or like you've said in the previous version of you, that didn't come natural.
Yeah.
Is that just a conscious behavior change that you've got to make as a leader, or is there something, other insights that you could share?
What I used to do was write it on my to-do list.
Okay.
And it sounds a little bit bizarre when you look at your to-do list and you think, I've got this report to write and I've got this presentation to prepare for, and I need to do the one-to-ones here and all those other things. But if you can make a diary note to spend 2 minutes just going to have a conversation with somebody each day, what's that going to cost you, and what's the potential benefit for that individual and for the wider team going forward?
No,
and it'll feel really, really uncomfortable. Go back to the chimp management model. The chimp part of your brain, the emotional side, will be telling you this isn't something that we normally do. This isn't something we feel comfortable with. What are we going to do if they tell us something that we don't know how to deal with it? But actually, there's a bit about how you go about managing that. Get used to being uncomfortable. Put yourself in those situations, because you'll get far more from people when they recognise the fact that you mean those things.
Yeah, and I would certainly, and we normally wait to the end to ask for challenges, but certainly I would set one to listeners at the moment, and I see where this lands with you, Simon. If you could, if the thought of doing that, if you're listening to this and there's a moment of going, oh, that cringe or that feel or that self-doubt, whatever emotion, dread comes across you thinking, oh, I don't want to be doing that. And,
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it is the challenge is just start with little conversations and just be curious about
Yeah,
where it lands. Like you
yeah.
say, um,
I, I, one of the most powerful books I've read ever, I think, was a book that I read last year called The Power of Mattering by a guy called Zach Mercurio. I heard him on a podcast and read his book, and I've actually spoken to him several times since then. Just that whole piece about how you give people a sense of being needed, being noticed, the difference that makes to people and the wider team. So yeah, that'll be another one that's on the list in the notes of the podcast.
it's all good.
But can I just say something about you? You mentioned psychological safety. Can I just share an anecdote? So I was working with a group of people a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about a meeting that they go into on a monthly basis. So this is in the NHS, and psychological safety has kind of been a buzzword in the NHS for the last 3 or 4 years. I've had my doubts as to how people really understand what psychological safety is. And what this group of people told me was that this particular senior leader starts the meeting by saying, "This is a psychologically safe meeting." So
Okay.
I said, "Okay, well, okay, how does that work then?" And they said, "Well, it doesn't really, because we don't get any more out of the meeting." And the conversation I had with them was the fact that psychological safety isn't something that you can give, you can just turn on and turn off. If you say this meeting is psychologically safe, what you're basically saying is, if you're not in this meeting, it's not, nothing psychologically safe. And actually, you can't just determine, you can't tell people something is psychologically safe. Psychologically safe is, or psychological safety rather, is a feeling that people have. And it comes back to trust. You don't get to give people psychological safety. It's not people give you, decide that an environment is psychologically safe for them.
And can you, for people that are new to psychological safety, because you're right, I did highlight it because it is a word, it is a term that's used
Yeah.
quite a lot at the moment, and I guess I probably added to that by bringing it in. Just for those that, can you give a bit of an overview of what it is, and if you're in a team, how to create it, or share some insights of what you do?
Yeah. So psychological safety is a term that was came from the author Amy Edmondson, and she did some work in the US. And it was in healthcare. She was interested in understanding why some hospitals have better patient safety rates than other hospitals, and her view was that where there was more patient safety issues would indicate that actually practice was poor. What she found was that, and this psychological safety came from the fact that those hospitals that had the higher reported patient safety incidents were the ones that are more psychologically safe. And what she meant by psychological safety is that people feel that they're able to speak up, point out when things have gone wrong, raise their concerns, put ideas forward, all without the fear of negative consequences towards them. And that's not something that you can just switch on and off. When you've worked in an environment, so I'll use the NHS because that's where I spend most of my time. The NHS is very hierarchical. People are, my first week in the NHS, I remember being asked by somebody what band I was, what my pay grade was. 25 years in the private sector, never told anybody what my salary was. And what I actually said to them was, why would I tell you what my salary is? And it was, they looked at me like I was an alien, because what everybody in the NHS does is the first thing they want to know about people is how much they're being paid.
Yeah.
But that then really, really does hamstring the organisations working in the NHS, quite simply because people get defined by their band. People that work on a band 2, band 3 get the sense that they're not worthy, and therefore they won't offer ideas or they won't speak up. And they're experts in what it is that they do. We should be celebrating that and harnessing their expertise and their role, because they're the ones that can tell us what's going on the front line and what needs to change and what needs to improve. but we've got people that feel as though because they are only this, or because of negative experiences they've had when they have spoken up, that people don't feel that they can speak up. So when you then go into psychological safety, you can't just all of a sudden turn around 80 years of culture and say all of a sudden, okay, it's safe to speak up now.
Yeah. So no, I know, and again, I know that we're I won't go into this in much detail, but certainly from my perspective, there's almost a talk around that hierarchical thing. It's almost, I'm not saying all people, but
Mm-hmm.
I've certainly witnessed some people when they've got an increased in band, they've also started to model the behaviors of the person that's modeled before,
Yeah.
who they didn't like before. So their attitude as a leader was bad, like going back to what we were talking
Yeah,
about. But now I've got the new badge and the new title and the new banding.
yeah,
I'm going to model the behavior that I'm familiar with, being at a band 8 or whatever.
yeah. But so it's not an excuse, but I understand why, because because people want to fit in.
Mm,
So if you move from a band 7 role to a band 8 role and you're mixing with a different group of people now, you want to fit in. Your brain is telling you, we want to be safe here. We want to feel part of this group. And the best way of being part of the group and fitting in is by behaving in the same way. It comes back to that bit about the self-awareness of, okay, who do I want to be and who am I being?
yeah, no, definitely like that. So so if you could, is there any insights if somebody is now kind of trying to create with a team, trying to create maybe it within NHS or outside the NHS? Because I think it, I've certainly got my insights if you're interested afterwards, but how to create an environment that it might be a team conversation, it might be a training session. That how do you create an environment that people do feel safe to speak up without judgment or with less judgment?
But in terms of how you create a strong, I don't want to use the term high performance because it gets bandied around a little bit too much and it has different kind of connotations. A, a, a team that is working to its optimal,
Yeah,
it isn't just the leader. You've got to create that team in the vision of everybody in the team.
yeah,
So whilst you may have an idea in terms of what it is that we're here to do, and this is what I'm being measured against, ultimately, I think everybody's got to feel that they've played a role in creating and understanding what the purpose of the team is, what it is that we're trying to achieve, what the values are. And values to a certain extent aren't that important because what is important is the observable behaviours. What are the standards we're going to hold each other to? What are the rules that are going to bind us
yeah,
here? And that work often doesn't get, I rarely see, well, it's probably a good job in a way because it's one of the things that helps me keep me in work. But
don't give all the secrets away though, don't worry, don't be sharing them all.
going in and spending that time with people, understanding what's important to them, giving everybody the opportunity, and you can use the excuse if we're too busy to do this, but if something's important to you, you will find a way of doing it. How you create an environment where people feel that they can put forward what's important to them, and then that can be played back in some kind of team charter that talks about what we're here to do, the direction that we're heading in, what's important to us, how we're going to behave towards one another. That's the foundation, and of starting to create an environment where people feel safe. The key bit then is how you then continue to work towards those standards. And actually, as a leader, if you've done that properly, your job becomes a little bit easier because what you'll find is that people in the team will hold each other to account. If somebody's not behaving in line with the things that we've said, that these absolutely are the things that we will do and these are the things we aren't going to do, they'll do that themselves.
Yeah, I really like that. If I could share with you, from a coaching perspective, we call it a team contract,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and we give everyone the opportunity. So, what do they want to get from the session?
Yeah.
And what do they want to leave with? And also, what's the things that they need from the group for they feel in the environment's correct for them to allow to speak out what they need to say in the way they need to say it.
Yeah.
Um, we get them all to write it on post-it notes because not everyone's massively brave to say it at the start, especially at the
Yeah.
start, to say it out
Yeah.
loud.
Yeah.
And then I will put the post-it notes on a contract and read it all out.
Yeah.
And then we always have a conversation around where do we feel with challenge.
Mm-hmm.
So again, challenge can be good in a team environment, but how do we know if we're pushing too hard, and who's the referee, which is
Yeah.
normally me, as the facilitator of a session.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I actually make physically people get off the seat and sign the contract,
Yeah.
much to
Yeah.
an eye roll the first time
Yeah.
I've delivered it sometimes. Oh,
Yeah.
but what's very interesting that every time I've done that, by the end of the session, everyone's gone, I love that start.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. That act of getting people to actually physically sign it is so important.
Because you're owning it. And then every single session I come back,
Yeah.
put it up
Yeah.
and go, right, has anyone got anything else to add?
Yeah.
Was there any changes to this? So we start every single session with, let's just review this before we start anything. Let's review this. Let's just make sure everyone's on the same page.
Yeah.
Everyone's coming to this with a fresh set of eyes. Has anyone changed or wants to add anything?
Yeah. And you can do this in an organization. You don't need permission to do this, I don't think. Often people will say, well, my boss won't want me to do that, or they don't anywhere else. If it's important to you, you'll find a way of doing it. So around about 30 years ago, I worked for a division of Unilever, and we had a new divisional director come in. He formed it was a new division that was bringing together all of the processes from receipt of an order through to payment, so including manufacturing and warehouse. And we did this exercise where we created the purpose and some of the values and behaviours. And still to this day, I can visualize what came out of that. So we had a logo which was right first time, on time, in full, with no invoice errors. He got mugs made, lanyards made, pens, pads made. Everybody in that function had all of those things. They'd all recognized that they played a role in creating that right first time. It took around about 6 months. It took a long time because it was about 1,500 people that were in that division. But still to this day, that sticks with that sense of identity, that we're part of a team that is working towards right first time. And this is my part. This is what I do that helps the bigger piece come together. Giving that people that sense of purpose and meaning to what it is that they're doing, how they're having a positive impact on other people, be they other people in the organisation, be it people outside the organisation. I think that is so important.
I really love all that. Just before we move into the advice stage, is there anything else that we've not covered that you want to share around unlocking potential in others?
I think the key thing is just having that interest in what people want. They may not always know what it is that they want, but how you can help them get what they want. Again, same organisation, funnily enough, different role. I remember having a one-to-one with somebody when I first met them, and she explained to me that she was quite happy doing what she did. She didn't want to be promoted. She was just looking to be the best version of herself in that particular role. And I didn't ask her. I managed it for 3 years, and I never asked her the question if that had changed.
Okay.
And she said to me one day, she was quite upset, and the reason why she was upset is because her life circumstances had changed, and the children were a little bit older, and actually she realised that she did want to do something different, but I hadn't asked her. So be curious with people, and just because someone gives you an answer about one thing one day doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be set in stone forever. And it's okay for people not to want to be promoted and to become chief executive in 10 years' time. If people just want to do what they're currently doing now to the best of their ability, that's great, because you need people like that in your teams.
Yeah, I love that. And again, it's, if you can hear yourself making an assumption, maybe stop and ask a curious question before there's not an assumption that everyone wants to be, like you've said, but at that moment in time, but there could be times where they do actually, like you said, with life changes. And I think that's really, really helpful.
Yeah.
So we're going to move to some advice to start wrapping this up.
Okay.
3 practical things that people could try today.
Okay. First of all, I'd say set an intention, just a simple intention at the start of every day.
Nice.
And work towards it. And give yourself a little check-in every now and again. Okay, have I done what it is that I wanted to do today? It might be how you're going to interact with people. So it may not just be a practical action. It might just be a feeling that you give to somebody. So that would be number one. I guess number two, I'd probably link to that, is about just take an action that shows somebody in your world that they matter.
Nice.
And the other one, I've not talked about this. I read a book called Super Communicators by Charles Duhigg, and he was talking about how to have conversations with people. He talks about the fact there's three types of conversation that are going on at any particular point in time. Great conversations are where the two people are having the same conversation, and he describes them as three different types as being either hugged, helped, or heard. And the way that I describe that to people is my second stepdaughter, when she was growing up, she, I guess like a lot of teenage girls, some of the challenges that you get in terms of navigating puberty, friendship groups, boyfriends, social media, all of those kinds of things. And she would come home sometimes quite emotional. And I'm quite a practical person. I'm a fixer. So I'd want to solve things for her. I was trying to help her. She didn't want that. She was just looking to either vent or just for some emotional support. So one of the things I would say, the third piece of advice would be, if you're having a conversation with someone and you're not sure what type of conversation or what they want from the conversation, ask them, what is it I can give you? Is it a hug, to hear you, or to help you?
Wow. Yeah. Really like that. Yeah, really like that. And it's a great question. I mean, I've got a teenage daughter and I've read the book. So and it's exactly that. What would you like me to do with this information?
Yeah. And I'm open as that now. I'll say.
Yeah. I am too, and it's like, it's what do you need from me with this?
Yeah.
And when they get familiar with it, they are quite good at just turning around and going, I probably could need some advice on this one. Okay, cool. Okay, that's fine. No, I really like that. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
One principle you wish every leader understood?
I think I'll go back to what I said earlier on, which is about leadership isn't a position, it's not hierarchy, it's a behavior. How a leader behaves impacts how people feel on a day-to-day basis. So just think about, okay, what is it that I'm doing? Yes, there's, again, one of my roles in the NHS, I was in quite a senior position, so I worked in the trust headquarters. So I got to experience some of the challenges that senior executives had with pressure from regulators, etc. So I kind of got that. But that whole thing then about, okay, when you walk out of there and you're going to go and meet with your team or people are going to see you, just think about what it is that you're doing, is what it is that you're doing aligning with the words that come out of your mouth as well.
Nice. I think that links to the self-awareness piece as well, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I guess just to sort of broaden that as well, is just because you're being paid whatever you're being paid doesn't mean that you necessarily know the answers. So kind of lead with curiosity when you're speaking to people. Don't assume that you know what it is that they're experiencing, what their challenges are, or what the solutions are. Ask them what they think.
Really like that. How can listeners turn some of these insights into actions? So what actions could people start? It might be, what's the first step that people could be doing?
So there's a risk that when you start to pick up, and I'm not suggesting this just comes from this episode of this podcast, but when you pick up on different tools and different ways of approaching something, there's a risk that you try and throw it all at the wall and hope that some of it sticks.
Yeah.
I would not advise people to do it. In the same way, I don't advise people to take everything they've heard in a leadership development program and put it all into place in one go. Find one thing that you think can move the dial in a positive way for you and for the people around you, and have a go at it. And if it doesn't work straight away, don't think, well, that didn't work, and then get the next tool out of the bag. Understand why and give it another go. Change doesn't happen quickly, particularly when you're working with other people, because people to some extent will look at you and think, well, that sounds a little bit unusual. He's going to change. If we keep our heads down, it'll go away and we'll get back to normal. But have another go. Try things a few times. What's working, what's not working, before you give up on something. But try.
No, I really like that.
I think I've fallen into the trap of trying to change too much too quickly, and in fact, succeeding at very little of it. And some of that is about, okay, well, I've only got however long left in life, and I want to do as much as I possibly can. But actually, that's not going to work. So pick one small thing and try, and it's going to make a difference, and get good at it.
Brilliant. Where can people follow you? The new website's live.
New website, yeah, that went live last week. That in itself was quite an interesting process, because it made me take a step back and try and speak to somebody who I'd never met before and explain to them what it is that I do and what my key messages are, and that was really helpful in terms of giving me some clarity. So yeah, website www.growthconsulting.uk. There's no co in there, just .uk. I'm on LinkedIn. It's Simon Beesley, BEESLEY, and I've also got a Substack as well.
That's brilliant. And what are you working on next? What's to come from you?
This year's going to be a big year for me. So I did quite a bit of associate work, so I'm going to carry on doing that, working in the NHS. But one of the reasons for doing the website is to really sort of broaden my client base, particularly thinking about SMEs. So website's gone live, and I'm starting to develop some sessions that are kind of open access sessions, either face-to-face or potentially virtual as well, that people can sign up to. And we'll have kind of a loose agenda, and we'll see what people want from it and what we can give them.
Nice. And there is lots of having prior access to the website. There's lots of good insights on that. So I would certainly go and check that out and have a look. There's some really good resources on that. And one final challenge you would like to set our audience?
One final challenge. Okay. So before you go to sleep tonight, write down the name of one person that you want to show up for better at home or at work the following day. And then act on that tomorrow.
Nice. What a place to finish. Thank you. So many insights, so many good reading. There's so many insights from your career and sharing. So many great reading opportunities. So I really, really appreciate your time. Thank you for sharing it all.
Thanks, Andy. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. And to the listeners, we'll see you again.